Hey everyone, welcome and thanks for joining me today. My name is Connor Simmons and I'm one of the product specialists here at Ionic. As many of us have seen over the course of the last few years, the lines are continuing to blur between the personal and professional use of our mobile devices. Some could say that's just the way it is in the digital world that we live in. And I think that's true. However, I don't think we can discredit the recent shift toward remote work in having a hand in contributing to blurring the lines. And that's why we're here today to talk to you about building secure mobile apps in the age of remote work. Regardless of where you stand on causation, the fact of the matter is we're using mobile devices a lot these days. And as a result, we spend time in a lot of apps. In a number that seems quite staggering, Statista noted that in 2021, consumers downloaded 230 billion mobile apps. A potentially more shocking metric is that's up 63% from 5 years prior. And these numbers only take into account first time downloads. If you take into account the reinstalls and the installed updates of those already downloaded apps, the numbers would be even more mind blowing. And yeah, those are some pretty crazy numbers. And sure, this type of hyper growth could be fueled in part by the global pandemic. But why do we care about this? Well, we care because the more time we as consumers spend somewhere means a greater invitation for bad actors to find ways to expose that usage. According to IBM reports, the average cost of a data breach in 2022 is roughly $5 million dollars when remote work is a factor. And this is a massive risk for enterprises. With no signs of mobile app usage declining, it's becoming all the more important to make sure the apps consumers are using are secure. So today we'll walk through a couple things. The prevalence of these types of data breaches and the attack vectors that were used, ways you can address these risks and prevent against them, and some ways to be proactive in mobile app security moving forward to avoid these types of missteps. So, just how prevalent are these threats to our apps? Well, it's sad to say, but it's more than you may think. And it's not just smaller enterprises that are making mistakes. There's some pretty big names that have been found recently to be making them too. Slack, something that many of us use on a day to day basis at our companies. There was a bug found within their shared invite link feature that was found to be using a hashed version of the user's password. They denied that clear text versions of the password were made accessible, but they also forced affected customers to reset their passwords. So this was something that certainly raised eyebrows of consumers. Klarna, which is a large banking and payment application, their app came under fire when users were briefly exposed to different users' account information. Of course, with such sensitive information possibly being shared, the company had to lock down the entire service until changes could be made. And then Apple and Google, which are obviously some pretty big names you've probably heard of, well, Apple's iMessage and 13 popular Android apps from Google were found to have issues recently too. The iMessage flaw sadly exposed all of its 900 million active users to spyware, granting access to the device owner's photos, messages, personal data, and location. And the Android app issues also exposed personal data like emails and chats and more. And with PortPass, a Canadian COVID vaccination passport application. Unfortunately, hackers were able to gain access to personal data of users because it was left stored unencrypted in plain text. And this impacted roughly 650,000 users. The more interesting part about this is that there's an entire organization dedicated to the awareness of prominent mobile risks. OWASP has gathered a top 10 list of the most frequent issues that plague mobile applications. And interestingly enough, the apps we just talked about covered 5 of them. For PortPass, it was insecure data storage, where data was left unencrypted. For Google Apps, it was insecure communication, where cloud misconfigurations opened the doors for easy access of data. For Slack app, it was insufficient cryptography, improper hashing of passwords that left them potentially exposed. On Klarna's side, it was client code quality, where poorly written code was released that resulted in the exposure of data. And with Apple iMessage, it was an example of code tampering, where through the use of Pegasus spyware, there was the possibility of data to be intercepted. So it's great that we know about some common risks and understand that this isn't just a scare tactic. These issues are things that genuinely pop up in apps we use every day. So, how can we go about addressing these threats? Well, to start, it's important to know what hackers are after. One thing they're after is credentials for devices or external services. If hackers gain access to credentials, those same credentials can likely give them access elsewhere. As much as we're told not to, many of us reuse credentials in many places, and of course, that would then give them access to use the same in multiple pieces of software. Personal data like name, social security, address, and location, well, those are great prospects for being sold or taken advantage of in a variety of different ways. Credit card information, well, this one obviously brings into play unauthorized purchases on your end, where the hackers are certainly not planning on being on the hook for them down the road. And simply getting access to a device, where if they know a specific device contains certain IP or trade secrets, you name it, getting access to the device opens the door to all of that private information. With that knowledge in hand, what steps can we take with your development team? Well, you could perform code reviews. No matter the level of engineer, whether it be a junior, senior, whichever, people make mistakes. So it's always good to have an extra pair of eyes to review code before it's merged into the main code base. You may also implement various testing procedures like static analysis testing, which is comparing code against particular coding rules, or dynamic analysis testing, which is using the app in real time and testing its behavior as an end user. Or maybe even penetration testing, which is testing specific vulnerabilities to things like the network or certain endpoints. And then there's hybrid testing, which is a combination of each of the three previous examples. In general, the aim is to follow best practices. Continue to remain educated on what those best practices are and do your best to adhere by them. Things like proper input validation mechanisms, for example, where we can't just trust the data that was passed from the front end and assume that it was properly sanitized. Maybe there was a vulnerability that exposes the API and was able to pass bad data to the back end. So it's important that we also perform validation on the back end as well. And lastly, turn to experts in security when you need it. A third-party vendor might be the best source of knowledge for secure coding practices to ensure your technology is guarded against bad actors. So it's good to understand these mitigation techniques, but to some degree, that's just being reactive. Sure, these issues pop up, we need to react to address them, and each of those tactics are important to correcting the problem. But moving forward, we want to be proactive about mobile app security. And we can do that with the right team, the right training, and the right support system. The right team is about having members that are invested in security. They care about following best practices and doing things the right way. The right training means as an organization, we're investing in our personnel to equip them with the knowledge and skills to build security into their everyday workflow. And the right support means having a line open to experts you trust outside your organization when you think you may fall short in some areas. And that's an area that we hope we can help. Here at Ionic, it's our aim to serve as one of your trusted partners when it comes to mobile app security. Through a variety of security-focused plugins, we can assist in development efforts of your application by offloading some of the most foundational native functionalities like authentication, biometric protections, and secure storage. We also offer industry-leading support services where a dedicated solutions architect is on hand to offer implementation guidance. Or you can work with us in a consulting or training fashion where we do things like code and architecture reviews, version control assistance for your app's dependencies, or instructions on following best practices, and more. All of which is backed by a guaranteed service level agreement. And that wraps up the material for today. We sincerely hope you found this helpful and thank you for taking the time to join us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I've included my socials and email on the screen for you. If you like today's material, we want to invite you to our upcoming webinar, Architecting Secure Mobile Apps with Ionic. where we'll dive deeper into much of the topics covered today, but we'll also take a closer look at Ionic's suite of security solutions that help safeguard users and their data. We'll be joined by a special guest as well to bring you through a demo on how it all works. We hope to catch you there. Take care, everybody.